Thank you to Louisa and her colleagues at the BioMaterialities Research Group at Humboldt for inviting me to present as part of this public lecture series. My only regret is it's a virtual talk and therefore doesn't involve visiting Berlin and enjoying the buzz of that city and meeting the research team there. So when I saw the invitation, I thought, yes, going to Berlin. And then I saw that it was virtual. I thought, oh, well. Thanks also to Ruth and to PLAAS for co-hosting this talk. I am, and I have been for 20 years, a great admirer of the amazing work that PLAAS researchers produce. So it's particularly nice to speak today. I am from Scotland and my accent can be quite thick. And I have to be very conscious of that. And so I will try very hard to speak nice and slowly today. Please feel free in the chat to say, go slower, okay? When Louisa invited me to speak to this audience, two things came to mind. The first was ensuring I could find a suitable day and time when I wasn't teaching or otherwise tied up. Unfortunately, I overlooked the fact that my kids are on school holidays this week. So I've actually struggled to squeeze in enough preparation, but thankfully they are away tonight, and so I'm not going to be disturbed. So it's quite nice to be able to do this without them knocking on the door. The second then was trying to find a title and an abstract that would work. And I went for the title, A Smart Food System or More Misconfigured Innovations, which I hope to speak to today in a way that will connect with the researchers in Berlin, PLAAS, and those from wherever else we are broadcasting to. In essence, my title speaks to the difficulty I have when reading about anything that's supposed to be smart, whether it's farming, agriculture, the city, or whatever. I'm struck here by the apparent roots of the word smart, which to the best of my knowledge comes from the German word schmerzen. We can check if that's right later, which apparently means pain, sting, or ache. And indeed, I feel pain, a sting, and I ache when the city or when food production is relabeled smart. Part of the problem is clearly that a smart blank is always to be contrasted with what went before, which we are supposed to believe was somehow idiotic or stupid. And that seems a little unfair to anyone involved in the production of the city or agriculture, where very evidently great skill and experience is necessarily drawn upon. Then there's the problem that the newness, the novelty, which goes to making the city or farming smart, stems from the application and expansion of certain types of technical or socio-technical, or indeed from our hosts in Berlin, biomaterial practices that tend to have their origins in private R&D labs populated by technical workers expounding a certain imaginary of what a better life entails. A better life is smart, they imply, because it values some or other forms of efficiency, because it propels us toward a certain type of future in which we're all inescapably enrolled in the accumulation strategies of large and growing tech firms. The better life, the smart life, is a life where we're bound together in chains of social relations, chasing information flows and tapping, clicking, and constantly transacting without ever necessarily making our lives any better. And often, in fact, making the lives of many others far worse, given the precarious jobs in the gig economy or the biases of so-called smart algorithms associated with a so-called smart existence. So against this backdrop, what I've tried to do since around about 2017 is engage facets, aspects of the smart world, especially as it's being played out in the food system, with a view to offering a critique of what's going on and asking questions about how it might be different and conceivably more emancipatory or even just. So my title then is A Smart Food System or More Misconfigured Innovations, and I'll talk to that later. And what I hope to do by the end of this talk is create an opportunity for us to discuss and possibly debate whether there is any scope to effectively respond to what's going on. So what is going on? In a sense, I think we can find in the literature on smart farming, and it's big, it's enormous, or literature on technical developments in the food system more generally, and with regards to other areas where life is supposed to be smart. I think we can find a striking set of dreams, or at least dreamlike visions. Now, it might be unfair to characterize it this way, but I can't help feeling like this is what we see all across the literature and certainly in the popular media. And in parenthesis, I would say that I think, I don't know if I'm right about this, but I suspect that funding agencies deserve some blame here. There is so much emphasis on impact these days. And so funds supporting startups or research agencies supporting new technologies encourage firms and research labs to create these wonderful artistic renderings of utopian futures that can attract clicks and tweets and improve altmetric scores or other metrics that demonstrate impact in some way. So with respect to smart farming or related terms such as digital agriculture or digital farming or the food system as a whole, the sort of stuff we see tends to emphasize a wide range of novelties from drones on the farm to delivery robots in the city. Now, the images here are typical. I really didn't need to go far to find them. It's a drone working with its colleagues, spraying agricultural chemicals. No doubt, of course, these are organic chemicals. They're harmless, they're friendly chemicals across what we are probably encouraged to believe is a good and efficient looking monocultural farming landscape. There's no people involved here. There's no workers in view, no neighbors affected by the fallout of the spraying. It's clean, smart, right? Advanced, we get the sense. On the top right, it's also a robot working with its colleagues again, indoors this time to pick lettuce, thereby displacing workers or possibly helping deal with the absence of workers, perhaps due to the low wages on offer or the lack of security they were offered. Right? We could wonder about that. In the city, meanwhile, on the bottom left, it's a delivery robot bringing, I think we can assume, organic craft meals to always, no doubt, ethical consumers. Or it's a smartphone or a tablet app using artificial intelligence, I dare say, to draw on, to use analyses of gut bacteria to provide individualized dietary advice and advice to, I expect, idealized neoliberal subjects who eat takeout, but like the woman in image 3, somehow manage to stay thin. It's fascinating, the color scheme here. It's all white machines. I guess it's white as clean, white as efficient. I don't know. It's smoothness, it's shiny, it's lacking friction, it's lacking contestation. There are no bugs here. There's certainly there's no pests with all the pesticide they're spraying, but there's no bugs, there's no glitches. Everything's working seamlessly. And it's the case, therefore, that what we often see in the literature on smart farming is a sort of map that traces the outline of a smart food system, one that's efficient, intelligent, sensor-rich, and possibly even cognitive insofar as the devices, the drones, the robots, the apps are processing information, making autonomous decisions, and calculating how they need to work and work together cooperatively to achieve their aims. I don't think there's any doubting the fact that this map of an emergent world is propelled or produced by a multitude of startups, as well as large, well-established firms trying to sell their visions of a better future. I also think it's important to note the role of funding agencies, such as those under the European Commission's umbrella, in encouraging new overlaps between emergent digital technologies and economic activity in all sectors, including agriculture and other elements of the food system. Digitalization of everything is just assumed to make life better, hence the support from governments for investments in these sorts of areas. Thus, to the extent we can talk about smart farming, we need to locate it with respect to a much broader rush to invest in digital tech and artificial intelligence, etc. It's as if there is only one game in town, and that game is to rush to throw everything at producing a hyper-technical, silicon-rich, people-less food system with profits flowing toward new players in all of the new Silicon Valleys, where the prospects of surviving as a food producer are almost entirely sidelined. I think getting to grips with what's driving all this sort of action requires an understanding of capitalism, no doubt, and I think that's something that we're really starting to see in the literature. There's a vibrant critique of the sort of the very broad level of what's going on here, and I think it also means seeing the dreamlike visions of a smart food system against the light of a corporate-run, corporate-friendly, corporate-first food regime, which has become so heavily intertwined with the financialization of food, the dominance of the ABCDs, the Archer Daniel Midlands, the Bunge, the Cargill, the Lewis Dreyfus food giants, and the wider integration of big tech with big food. And I note here that I don't think I've seen any better exploration of all this than the recent ETC Group report titled Food Barons 2022, Crisis Profiteering, Digitalization and Shifting Power, which I would encourage everyone to go and look at. However, I want to propose that we go a little bit further and dwell upon the contemporary cultural political economy, a term I take from Bob Jessop's work on the interaction between culture, politics, and economics, between what we might refer to as difference, culture, I guess, governance, politics, and production, the economy. So draw upon how is this an aspect of the contemporary cultural political economy, and ask how life today directs research and innovation attention away from causes and focuses instead on ameliorating or mitigating effects. So we see interventions that tinker around the edges rather than tackle systemic problems. It's a cultural political economy that seeks technical fixes to everything while assuming an app will make oppressive life more bearable. So we assume oppression should live on, but hope a new digital service might help. It's a cultural political economy that normalizes research and innovation as a privatizing activity, as a private accumulation strategy. And so not only do we try to abandon public universities as places where learning occurs for personal well-being and the intellectual stimulation of citizens, but we constantly emphasize how the impact of research and innovation should be judged by the commercializing prospects of what we do. For example, that we're here to capture and create value, which is something I've seen recently. And it's a cultural political economy that assumes justice equates with a permanent race for efficiencies. And so in this sense, the notion that the data grab that we've seen in that we've talked about for the last few years is bound up with a land grab, which is a longer lineage, it is almost justifiable and would make sense if digitalization means dispossessing smallholders or peasants, then so be it. That would be a good thing for the production of life on this planet today. I then think it's crucial to see how the contemporary cultural political economy also seeds and feeds, I guess, what Catherine Hales calls the planetary cognitive ecology. And I think this happens via the creation of new data reserves regarding food and agriculture, which will all be fed into artificial intelligence. So, there's been a lot of attention drawn recently to ChatGPT and its sort of sentient powers or possibilities. And so we make farming smart, and we create new data trails, and we thereby generate new clues for machine learning to compute what should be done on the planet. And one could ask ChatGPT how to solve a particular problem to do with the food system, and we will see the sort of results that will be spat out as. It's a contemporary, it's a cultural political economy that feeds the planetary cognitive ecology via new, private, predatory online regions oriented around calculations and determinations about viable life. So we make new smart farming operations and reassess what's viable and what deserves to be kept or deleted. And it's a cultural political economy that feeds the planetary cognitive ecology via new forms of colonization or colonialism, via involuntary enrollment, dispossession, forced data removals, and other subordinations to obscure centers of power in Silicon Valley or wherever these companies are based. And so we make new smart farming services or devices and contribute, I think, to the expansion of data colonialism, which works for Alphabet, for Microsoft or Oracle, but relies on the food system's subordination to clicking, tapping, and the hidden algorithmic background where futures are plotted and mapped. And so the result, I think, is the emergence of what we might refer to as countless and proliferating misconfigured innovations. That is, smart farming, the smart food system, the innovation occurring to make cows talk, to make tractors think, to let robots replace workers. It's all well and good. And, of course, one should show respect to the people who work on these things. 3 cheers for the PhDs, for their patents, for the new rounds of investment from venture capitalists and others. If that's their job, that's what they try and do. And we are seeing this pretty extraordinary development, set of developments. But I think it's not configured in ways that will help really to solve the problems. Problems are effects of processes, and the configurations needed to make innovation effective need to begin at the ground and work up to address the problematic or unjust unfolding of processes. As I've argued in a recent paper in Journal of Rural Studies, smart farming innovation processes begin and proceed without adequately conceptualizing the underlying obstacles and limitations confronting food producers today. Technological innovations that reinforce power asymmetries regarding data ownership, for example, or that fail to challenge implicit biases towards certain types of environments, render some interests invisible while reifying specific types of logics, such as narrow measures of economic efficiency. And what I would encourage people to do is have a look at this case in the Berkeley Haas case series from the Haas School of Business at Berkeley, where they talk about the creation of a smart village in Andhra Pradesh in India, where new technical arrays are almost rolled out, if you like, apparently also always with the permission of the local people and their applause. And these new enrollments, I guess, are certainly configurations, but it's impossible to understand them as being configurations that are capable of addressing what's actually wrong with Andhra Pradesh's location within the world, with its position relative to capital flows or accumulation strategies or agrarian relations or the food system as a whole. And so it gives you that sense of misconfigured innovations, if ever there was one. And what I'll do in the when I finish is I'll attach my paper in Journal of Rural Studies, which talks about that, and then you might see that for yourself. So what to do about this and how to respond? I think the starting point for this, I think if we assume, I think if we agree, I don't know if we can agree, but I think if we can agree that most of the smart farming ideas, most of the dreams, most of these technologies are misconfigured innovations, or however else you want to refer to them. If we can find any agreement that they might be problematic, the question then is how to respond to that. And I think the starting point is just to recognize that it's 2023, and the strong likelihood of digital life expanding. This stuff isn't going away. We're all talking on Zoom. We may never meet up again. I may never get to Berlin. So this stuff's not going away. And I think any critique of the food system today has to just take that as well, it may go away, right? But it seems unlikely. And then I also think that we have to recognize the challenge here of negotiating the increased uncertainty wrought by digital life. As I've referred in some of my papers, the chance of space swells with all the new taps and clicks and the devices and services that we're using. There's incredible uncertainty out there in the world today, and I think digital life has really amplified that uncertainty. So that maybe is a starting point. And that gives us an opening, I guess, but it also makes things tricky, right? The next thing I think, though, is to identify and examine strategies for manipulating digital technologies while building whichever future that you might want to build. Certainly, there are many who talk about the need to construct food sovereignty. The ETC group recently have talked about the need to build a long food movement. There are those who talk about a people's agricultural policy rather than the common agricultural policy in the EU. Others talk about the need for new planetary politics to address what's going on the planet as a whole. So I think and I think in these efforts to imagine what a food system might be like, or what the planetary politics might be like, we have to think about how we can take advantage of digital technologies. And 100%, absolutely, that's not easy. So I'm not sitting here saying, just have to do this, right? And there are risks involved. I mean, I think the idea that we need to curate our own data, in a sense. If we are curating data, then we're definitely amplifying our own exposure to these constellations of contingencies that exist out there as a result of the expansion of digital life. So, you could imagine a scenario where we start relying on Zoom, but then Zoom becomes something that doesn't work, and so we can't have these meetups. So we engage digital technology, we pursue ways of manipulating it, but we become exposed to it. Another risk, though, is that we inadvertently would be contributing to the problem as a whole. Maybe this drift towards digitalization of everything really is something that we have to try and resist entirely. I think that's unrealistic, but one could certainly make that argument. I think what's needed is a sort of ongoing, iterative, constantly experimental, tentative, probably, replatformization of our social relations. And I think that's increasingly something that we can find in the literature on digital technology today, and whether it's to do with the food system or not, the sense that the platforms that we experience around us, that we contribute to, that we pay for, that we work for, whether we're being paid or not, are problematic and need to be remade, need to be redone. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask the question as to whether a sort of emancipatory smart farming might even be possible. Big question mark here. I worry about this. And my reference to emancipatory here is to try and draw the connection with a body of work, a body of really, really impressive scholarship on emancipatory rural politics in the contemporary period against the backdrop of authoritarianism and populism and some pretty dark forces out there. And so I wonder about the scope that might exist for forms of smart farming that are not just about reproducing power asymmetries, that are about undoing things. So in my paper in Journal of Rural Studies, which I'll post to the chat, I ask about the possibility of emancipatory smart farming, what it might look like. And what I argue is that we could imagine that it might be conceivable that the overriding ethos guiding use of technology in emancipatory smart farming would be maybe agroecological, maybe regenerative. All of these terms are very, very contested these days because there've been many of them captured by some of the largest food companies. But maybe the overriding ethos could be food sovereignty oriented. Right? I would argue that the devices, the instruments, or the machines are hackable rather than locked, that the software environments and apps are open source rather than proprietary. I would suggest that when it involves digital platforms, the platforms are cooperative rather than private or oligopolistic. I would argue that matters regarding a farmer or peasant's privacy are built in by default, that value generated by users' data should be shared or should be sovereign, should be held cooperatively, that the approach toward the technology development is bottom-up, participatory, incremental, iterative, rather than top-down or paternalistic. And I would propose that smart farming arrangements of devices and software are intended to make users independent of the agricultural technology providers rather than dependent on them. So finding ways of moving out of that constant dependence on these agricultural giants like John Deere or Bayer or what have you. And I would say that systemic challenges facing food producers in the possible version of emancipatory smart farming are undermined or resisted and possibly overcome, maybe right through the use of these technologies. It's conceivable that you could start to build something that is that's maybe better configured forms of innovation rather than just the constant misconfigured innovations that we see around us. I also think that it's conceivable that we might be able to use or create new technical arrays that are grassroots led, that are civil society led, that use things like open source or even open source intelligence, and maybe even blockchain. I think blockchain gets a terrible reputation, and probably it deserves it. But there's glimpses in the blockchain literature of radical uses, or most of them are very hard to interpret. That's part of the problem. It's often very difficult to understand what they're actually saying. But certainly there are some people who, scholars and activists who make the case for blockchain, who make the case that blockchain might have some scope in the 21st century for emancipatory purposes. And so my paper, which I'll also post into the chat later, engages that also. And it's not so much about smart farming, but it's more just about the way that we might be able to draw upon these technologies and kind of manipulate them. So I think I've been speaking for half an hour, and I think it's probably enough. Hopefully I've not gone too fast, I don't know, and that you've managed to understand my terrible accent, but thanks very much.